On April the 15th, 1912, it's a date many of you are familiar with if you've watched the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio. It's the date that the Titanic sank. The Titanic was on her maiden voyage from England to New York City. Got out in the middle of ice floes that were in between there in some polar areas and hit an iceberg, sank. Hundreds of lives were needlessly lost. There was countless errors. They should have been prevented. Myself and my cameraman, Daniel, we were just talking about some of the outrageous things that took place that could have been prevented there on the ship and even locally with another ship nearby that could have been prevented had people just paid attention and done what was right. And all kinds of things there you can get into about the Titanic and how bad it was. But I want to talk about something else. The Titanic, and many of us know that it was labeled the ship that God couldn't even sink. I want to share with you today that the Titanic was doomed to sink before it ever left port. I want to show you why. When they said God couldn't sink it, they had built it with the latest of technologies. They had built it with the most beautiful of structures inside, and it was probably the most glorious liner of their day. And as it went off from England, heading out that day, it was made, as the hull was cruising through the water, the hull was made, and again, we're dealing with the technologies of that era, of the early 1900s. The ship was made of a very low-grade steel. It's the same steel that we use today for rebar. Rebar is those metal sticks that you put when you're pouring concrete. You put it in there. It's not good for anything. It rusts real easy. It can decompose real easy. We use it for concrete just to hold concrete together, but it's worthless to build anything out of. You don't build anything of lasting value or nature out of rebar, that grade of steel. That was the grade of steel that ship was cast out of. And as long as you kept it in warm water, if you kept it down in the Bahamas, the Caribbean, your ship's going to be fine. But they weren't going to the south. They were staying up north, going through the ice floes. And there's a thing called brittle fracture. Brittle fracture is when it becomes, the steel becomes very hardened because of the cold, almost like it freezes, and then it doesn't take much, almost like an eggshell. You can poke an eggshell and it fractures. Well, it was the same thing. You really didn't even have to hit a giant iceberg. You could have hit a much smaller one, and the ship would have sunk. And as it became brittle in that icy water, everybody's lives was in danger, and yet nobody had any idea. The cutting-edge creation of wise men of their day, this cutting-edge creation of this ship that not even God could sink, was really a floating soda can on that icy night, like a thin layer of aluminum. It was ready to rip and to sink. The Bible talks about man's wisdom. When man thinks, look at what we can do, and look at how we can do something that's great, and not even God could interfere with these plans. The Bible talks about that in 1 Corinthians chapter number 1, starting in verse 21. It says, "For since in the wisdom of God, the world through wisdom did not know God, it pleased God through the foolishness of the message preached to save those who believe. For Jews request a sign and Greeks seek after wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified. And to the Jews it's a stumbling block, and to the Greeks it's foolishness. But to those who are called, both Jew and Greek, Christ the power of God, and He is the wisdom of God. Because of the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. For you see your calling, brethren, that not many wise according to the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble are called. But God has chosen the foolish things of the world to put to shame the wise. And God has chosen the weak things of the world to put to shame the things which are mighty. And the base things of the world and the things which are despised, God has chosen, and the things which are not, to bring to nothing the things that are, that no flesh should glory in His presence. Because of Him you are in Christ Jesus, who became for us wisdom from God, and righteousness and sanctification and redemption, that as it is written, He who glories, let him glory in the Lord. It was never about our wisdom. It was never about our intellect. It was always about God's. The Christ life is foolish in the eyes of the world. They don't see it. They don't get it. Some of you can remember before you came on the Christ life, some of you can remember how you were and how you acted. The church is foolish. Man, how they believe is foolish. What they think is foolish. How could what I wear be a problem? How could how I act be a problem? With what I drink or the people I'm with or the actions I have, how could that be a problem? I'll tell you, we can't look at life through our own eyes. We have to look at them through His eyes. Because to man, not even God could sink the Titanic. But to God, well, it's a different story. You see, God sees, God knows, God understands. We are so limited, but God is not. Our wisdom is foolishness in God's eyes. God's not asking you to be wise. He asks you to be obedient. He doesn't ask you to figure it out. He asks you to trust Him. He asks you to search this Word and find what it is that He has for our life, because we live according to His Word, not our own. I want you to remember this as you go about your week this week, as you live and track the footsteps of Christ walking this life. Remember that man has a very bad track record. Man fails. Man blows it. Man doesn't always do it right. But God has a perfect track record. God has never failed. He's never going to fail. His track record is incredible. It is perfect. So I want to encourage you, if you're going to be wise in something, be wise in God. Go with the things that God says to do, because God never fails. God bless you. I love you. Pray that you have a great week this week as you track the Christ life.
Difficult, but not impossible.